Hello, everybody. My name is Larry O'Brien, Vice President of Research at ARC Advisory Group. And this is the latest edition of the ARC Logistics Viewpoints podcast. And today, we could probably call it the Logistics Viewpoints Cybersecurity podcast because I have the CSO of Blue Yonder here with me today, Erika Voss. How are you doing, Erika?
I'm great, Larry. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that practically nobody seems to be talking about in the supply chain vendor community, and that is actually cybersecurity in supply chain solutions and the physical supply chain itself, of course. And Erika, one of the reasons we're having this call is I actually attended a webinar that you gave on cybersecurity in the supply chain, and I was quite impressed because, to my knowledge, this is the only discussion about really cybersecurity that I've seen from a, supplier on this side, in quite some time. So I'm really glad you're here with us today to talk about this. We do have a lot of good questions lined up. I'd like to start, just by talking a little bit about yourself, your role at Blue Yonder and who Blue Yonder is for those of us that may not be familiar.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Larry. First of all, it's always fun to join a podcast. And I think, much like you say, supply chain cybersecurity or even just supply chain security in general it's almost like a taboo topic. So I was, one, it's always fun to join a podcast with you and be able to have this conversation. But I think it also kind of, evangelizes what we need to do as a broader security community and how we're, what I clearly as the title of our podcast, how are we actually truly securing the chain? So I think this is just a great start into what we're needing to do and how we need to make this a regular topic just across the industry as a whole. A little bit about me. So I've been with Yonder now 18 months. It's been a fast 18 months, naturally, of course. But I've been in the broader security umbrella, what I like to say, for a little over 30 years, whether it's been physical security, business continuity, crisis management to, the chief security officer role that I have here today. It's been an incredible time. Like I've been in supply chain for a number of years, working for large, Fortune 100 companies or, things around, how do you want to physically protect the product? I've had a great, incredible career, and it's been fun to kind of see how supply chain has started once upon a time to where it is today. I have my doctorate in insider threats. So it's, that's always something that people also don't want to talk about when you think about it, even within the supply chain, is we have to recognize that there's even bad people, unfortunately. And so I think, in this capacity over the conversation we're going to have over the next, few minutes or whatever you could say in some capacity, I'm excited to dive deep into this with you. A little bit about Blue Yonder. Blue Yonder is a global supply chain company. We're one of the, we're the world leader in the digital supply chain transformation, which I think is really key, is that word is digital. Whether you're a retailer, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a logistics, service provider, worldwide, they rely on Blue Yonder, to not only just optimize and accelerate their actual supply chain, that end-to-end supply chain from planning all the way to the fulfillment to delivery and the returns. Blue Yonder built, an AI-driven, platform, and it's multi-enterprise, multi-tier, from a network perspective. And what it is it's really here to help enable you to forecast and have better dynamic management and capacity and inventory and transportation at the end of the day. One thing I think that is really powerful for us is, we're here to truly be that modern supply chain. Like the complexity of a supply chain in general is massive. And I think the fact that we can introduce not only the transformation, we can introduce, modernization to it. We're helping you build a more resilient supply chain that actually, not only delights our customers, which naturally is of course near and dear to me, but it helps you scale in a better, more profitable and flawless fashion while also recognizing that, our product and our offering is truly secure.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you touched on a lot of stuff that we want to talk about in this podcast, right? AI and,
Yeah.
kind of, the whole aspect of digital transformation and everything. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you think cybersecurity has kind of been overlooked, right? You mentioned earlier that it's kind of a taboo topic, right? I see that, a lot of times, and not only in the world of supply chain and logistics, but also in the world of industry and critical infrastructure and so forth. I think cybersecurity is one of those topics that tends to kind of scare people. It's not something people necessarily want to dive into, with both feet,
Yeah.
but, it's certainly quite important. I mean, and it's definitely, from what we see as an analyst firm, cybersecurity incidents are a major source of unplanned downtime now, right? They can
Very
really have
much.
impact on your supply chain. So, give us your impressions on why you think nobody really wants to talk about this topic right now, right? But then we have the flip side of this where cyber resilience and cybersecurity are hugely important to the supply chain now. We have a lot of things that are impacting that. So we need to talk about that as well.
Definitely. You top on the thing, when you think about it, why people don't talk about it, it's, there's that culture of fear across the industry of, I don't want to admit that something wasn't secure or something was left open or something was hacked. And it's this taboo topic, like literally, like you said, Larry, that it's like we're afraid to admit with some type of shame or fear of like, there's this reputational damage it's now done to me. And we do that because, we almost take it upon ourselves internally, personally, that like I failed my customer or I failed my team or I failed my company. And so when people choose not to talk about cyber, they're actually creating it as a worse, dynamic because cyber is about actually building a community of trust. And that's the thing that I think people need to recognize is if we don't talk about it, we're not actually going to be, better together. And I think, how I think about that from an incident standpoint is you look at cybersecurity attacks. I mean, that's what the attacker is doing is they're crowdsourcing to actually be able to see if they can take you down. It's a reputational hit for them in a notoriety capacity of, oh, I was able to do something to, XYZ company and I was able to claim that notoriety on like a dark web or in, a cyber forum in some capacity. And it's like, we as CISOs, we should be doing that same thing as crowdsourcing. Why are we not talking about it? Like attacks are happening faster, when an attack happens every 38 seconds or identity, all roads are leading back to identity now for identity based attacks. Or to your point, I think, the other thing there is we're not going to be stronger together as a community if we don't talk about the challenges that continue to hit us. Every company is excited about adopting AI and making you more efficient and effective and faster. And, us in security, we look and go, great, here's another attack vector I have to worry about. And it didn't take
Right.
long because now there's, media out there about Jade Puffer being it. Here's an agent that can actually come and attack you for a ransom. And it's like, one, you could celebrate that of wow, look how fast things are moving in a footprint from an attack perspective, but also why is nobody talking about how do we protect ourselves against, Jade Puffer? And so it's like that fear or that reputational hit that we don't want to actually talk about is actually doing us damage. And so I think the fear of repercussions or the fear of if I talk about my cyber posture, now it's inviting me to be attacked. Folks, you're being attacked all the time. Any security person would tell you that. Any security engineer, leader, incident responder will all tell you you're always going to be attacked. It's do you have the right things in place to make sure you can prevent the attack? What are those preventative things you can do? And you can't prevent everything. We all know that from 100%. But being able to just to have the right defense posture and those things in place, those are the right things you want to actually be doing. And that's the stuff we should also be talking about too.
Yeah, we should be talking about that. And I've always found that if we find that these things are difficult and we kind of shy away from them, that's probably a signal that we should kind of lean into them, right?
We should a
you
hundred
know,
percent. Yeah.
yeah, these are things that have enormous consequences if things go wrong. Not just from a productivity and unplanned downtime point of view, but also a safety point of view, and other things. I mean, in the supply chain. I mean, it doesn't exist in isolation, right? I mean, so if something happens in the supply chain, it's not just happening to one person. It's happening to, a lot of different points that are all, interconnected in these complex systems. But you did
Well, and
mention
I think
earlier, I'm sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think you hit on the point that actually is pretty powerful. Is it's we need to figure out how to lean into it. We need to figure out what to exactly like what you were talking about earlier. Is what does that resiliency look like? Like everybody's suffering from an outage, everyone's suffering from an attack. It's not the if and when something happened, it's the when and again. It's the again piece that really needs to be where we should be investing. At some point, we're seeing that across the industry, across the globe. I mean, you look at Europe last year, a bunch of companies suffered massive ransomware attacks, but it's like, you haven't heard anything since then. And it's like, we need to figure out how do we build more of this resiliency together as a cyber community and say, here's how we actually can go not only protect ourselves, but how do we make sure that we're, you know, protecting downtime as much as possible or safeguarding sensitive data or making sure that we actually can not only maintain our customer trust, but the customers feel like if something does fail, there's a response to them faster so they can also be prepared on their end.
Yeah, having a good response is important. And I find that's one of the areas that most people ignore completely, right?
100%.
They invest in all kinds of tools and software, to protect yourself or firewalls or what have you. But, if something actually happens, I find that a lot of end users kind of get caught with their pants down. Well, what do we do now? So, yeah, very important to have a response plan. Very important to lean into this. very important not to have this attitude of, well, I don't really know a lot about this. So I actually had somebody from a material handling publication talking to me about this earlier this week. Well, a lot of these people don't know anything about cybersecurity. So how is it even feasible to train them and get everybody up to speed? And, there are ways to do that. And it starts with us all talking about it. But the other thing I think that's important too are these new technologies that are coming along, right? So now we have pervasive cloud computing, containerization, virtualization. We have AI, which I'll get into a little bit later in the conversation as a separate topic. But a lot of these technologies that are enabling digital transformation are also, expanding the threat surface, from a cybersecurity point of view. It's making things much more integrated, not just from inside, an individual enterprise, but inter-enterprise integration is now becoming more prevalent
Yes.
through these cloud computing and virtualization and other technologies. You care to comment on that and how, we can address these technologies in a way that makes sense from a security point of view?
Yeah, I think the good thing is it still goes back to, one hand, nailing the basics. Do you have the right, detections, response, alerts, whichever, your infrastructure is in place from a cyber defense footprint. But you're spot on in saying the world has evolved to everything is now very modern, and how you approach that modernization is key. And it's zero trust used to be this concept once upon a time, and now it's, for us here at Blue Yonder, we do more around the trust by design. How do we make sure that we've got the right, cloud security posture management? We have, real time monitoring and continuous monitoring that continues to happen in our cloud native footprint. And I think, you have to be able to have this modernizational approach of how do you now really have continuous monitoring, which used to be just a thing for government agencies. Like FedRAMP was a great example. They had dedicated, real time continuous monitoring teams. You're seeing that same concept now, quite frankly, drip deeper into actual the industry. It's I need to have continuous monitoring all the time. It's not just for a government environment anymore. It's I need to know that I have the right cloud security posture management in place, that I'm doing continuous monitoring. I have policy enforcement. I have the right integrations I'm bringing together. I'm protecting not only just, actual platforms or capabilities, but it's now how am I deploying and protecting my cloud workload from a protection standpoint, and, and saying, I'm offering, that continuous vulnerability scanning all the time, that runtime protection, the micro segmentation. It used to be just about network segmentation. It's I need to isolate my workloads now to actually prevent attackers from being able to move laterally across my environment. And I think, the more you see people moving into how this is and what it needs to be, I mean, this is where I think it just becomes powerful as, not only just a cybersecurity leader, but even just cybersecurity teams. It is about, yes, once upon a time I had to protect a server and make sure that the server had a patch or the port wasn't open. But now it is exactly that. It's Docker, it's GitHub, it's, AI is giving me different ways to think about how I deploy into my pipeline, my CI/CD pipeline. And so you have to move into having some type of cloud security posture management. And you have to be able to understand what your zero trust concept needs to be, but then how do you bring identity into it? And so the trust by design concept that we really talk very strongly about is it's more around how do we bring all those pieces together to say it's not only embedded as part of our zero trust capabilities in the areas we're strong in our cloud, footprint. It's we're going after how do we keep things more protected from a resiliency standpoint to say we've not only consolidated all of our tools into one true like, cloud native visibility capability and functionality. It's we want you to feel that Blue Yonder is the most secure environment and is one of the best, most secure environments because we've invested in that modern technology as well.
That's great. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying about continuous monitoring, right? Because a lot of these cybersecurity incidents are really transient. If you're not doing the monitoring and watching what's going on, you're not going to know what happened. So, and that is one of the key elements that's missing right now, especially when you get down to the operational level, right? And that's where I kind of tend to live, is in the OT side of things versus the IT side of things. Not that it's separate, right? I mean, everything's kind of integrated now, whether you like it or not. I mean, it's something that happens at the IT or enterprise level is going to have an impact, in your operations as well. And I think you need to be cognizant of that. But, very glad to see you're taking this, continuous monitoring approach and so forth and also zero trust. It's getting much more complex out there. We have to have these kind of technologies in place all the time. And that kind of brings us to the next, the 500-pound gorilla in the room, AI, right? So, It's doing a lot of good things for us. I think there's a lot of potential productivity gains to be had from AI. But I call it the double-edged sword, right? There's also a significant risk that AI poses to end user organizations, not just in the world of supply chain and logistics, but I think just about every critical infrastructure and industrial segment out there. So, on the one hand, we have a lot of new tools that we can use that have this great AI functionality. But on the other hand, we have, a lot of employees using AI within these organizations that we may not know what they're using, right? We
Yes.
may not have, sufficient guardrails, for how they're using it. So how is Blue Yonder approaching this, situation with AI? Not just internally with your own software development, but also helping out the customers, right?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think it's one area I think that becomes strong, quite frankly, from at least I can give it from the security footprint is, we continue to approach AI security to not only help us internally, but also our customized by, our customers through truly defense in depth. And that's the model that is always going to be, quite frankly, a cyber foundation. And I think if people are not truly figuring out how there's defense in depth or defense in depth matrices or things like that, and like bringing in AI into your actual, attack landscape or attack posture, whichever you want to call it, or posture management, you're never going to be able to actually provide that level of confidence. I think, you know, IT organizations or security organizations or companies in general, we're still struggling, quite frankly, even with, shadow IT or shadow development teams still wanting to do their own thing. And AI has just now become that next thing of
Oh,
great.
yeah,
Now I've got to worry
shadow
about
AI.
shadow. Yeah, now I have shadow AI. Great. I just continue to grow my shadowing. But I think the thing that becomes really powerful is it's how how you treat and deal with these open source models and how you truly look at them as it's just another emerging tech, which is a lot of what I talk about. And it's being able to say it's just another thing I can't actually trust. And then how do I actually want to protect those third party dependencies or that third party software, into my actual pipeline? It's whether it's an AI system or a model or whatever you want to say. I just have to still approach it as this is just another defense in depth layer. It's now I have a layer for AI, and how I approach it is, I want to make sure I understand what the lineage is, and I want to understand the source and the transformations and how it comes into my environment, how we make sure that we're, having the right security controls in place. Again, it goes back to the zero trust or the trust by design and being able to fine tune on that. I mean, you're in security or even in just the technology, you're always going to be fine tuning something, just kind of like how you're always going to be doing continuous monitoring. And I think that's the thing you're now doing with AI is you want to make sure you don't have any type of, data poisoning or hallucinations, or you have to make sure you have that compliance footprint to say, yes, I'm doing all the right things. I think one thing that I think becomes really powerful for us is, we continue to basically just treat the models, like it's just another version of a code in some capacity. So we constantly are doing, again, that continuous monitoring, that continuous scanning. We're looking for the malicious code or the backdoors or things like that, through our tools and capabilities. And we're ensuring that those things are not being tampered with in that capacity. And it's just through that defensive layer. And so I think as you see things evolve, we used to be concerned about the SBOM, and now we're concerned about the AI bomb, the AI bill of materials. And I think that's an area people aren't talking about enough, which is how do we know what the actual data sets are? Like all roads, like I said, for security attacks are leading back to identity. With AI, it's all roads are going to lead back to now data. And I think you have to understand your data sets and your frameworks and what are those base models. And we have that sophistication and those levels of controls that we put in place to really monitor those APIs or the runtime behavior or, the AI bomb, I guess is what you could say. And I think if you're not looking at it from that way of how to do that defense in depth with AI, you're going to be in that situation where unfortunately you're going to have some type of data exposure that you didn't see coming, and you couldn't actually have prevented it in some capacity, or at least have the right controls or frameworks in place to actually do it. I think one thing also that's really powerful is, I, like every security leader, we are very governance focused people. So we look at the different types of frameworks that are out there, whether it's NIST, whether it's the Coalition for Secure AI or OWASP. You have to bring those things in place, those frameworks in place into your company and be able to say, here's how we're doing this, here's how we're modeling it, here's how we're defending against it. You almost kind of have to create that sandbox environment to be able to say, I want to see how I can reverse engineer something to be able to protect against it. And so you have to do the same thing with AI. And we're lucky we have those capabilities, not of course being an AI digital supply chain company, but I think it's that level where being able to do all those things is actually just what makes us stronger. And that's the thing I think you're seeing is companies know to do defense in depth. I think you're going to see the industry shift to, it's defense in depth with AI. You're going to see an actual model around how do you defend against AI attacks. And I think that's just where you're going to see the industry shift to. And I think it's one of the things we do well with Blue Yonder is, you think about people talk about security where I talk about trust. It's not about just security anymore. It's the customer is not buying security. The customer is buying trust. I'm trusting Blue Yonder's products, capabilities, all those things. And if you're not selling that trust as part of here's why it's a great thing to do from a security as one piece of the differentiators, I don't know how you're going to succeed in the future of where things are going forward with AI and what the model's going to become. Much like you and I talked about, our next podcast is probably going to be about quantum computing and what are we doing to approach quantum computing.
Yep, that's going to be the next thing. And certainly, it's moving fast. There's a lot of stuff to keep up with here. You mentioned something about trust, and I think that's an important point to bring out. So you literally sit at the center of thousands of connected warehouses and retailers and carriers and so forth. So how does Blue Yonder go about defining your radius of trust when securing an ecosystem that large and complex?
I mean, I think I
Easy
think
question.
that's the. I know. I was like, couldn't give me one that's any easier for me, Larry. No, I think that's the thing that actually is probably an area. I think, quite frankly, in some capacity, is really a differentiator for us. Like, I have a dedicated cyber trust arm. I don't think I'm anybody else in the supply chain that actually has a dedicated entire domain to customer trust and to cyber trust. And it's proactive reach out if there's an incident. You are proactively hearing from us of, hey, it might not be anything other than, hey, we see something, but we want to at least give you a heads up so you can start preparing. No one's really making that as a differentiator. And that's something we pride ourselves on, by having this dedicated cyber trust arm and doing a ton of thought leadership around, how we show up with our customers and how we share, what that digital interconnectedness is inside, modern supply chains is we do that because we want trust to be paramount. So if you think about, what I always talk about is the customer, and then you think about trust, the two letters that really matter in between both of those words that are, that need to come out, the two letters really is us, the U and the S, because we're all in this together. And if we're not focusing on the trust and focusing on the customer together, like, you might as well be running blind, whether you're a vendor, whether you're adopting a framework, whether defense in depth, like, I know you can prevent downtime. I know you can prevent data integrity and reputation. I know you can build all these things in a great way. But if you're not thinking about trust as part of your core ecosystem with your customers, I don't know how you're actually going to get ahead. Again, it goes back to kind of like customers are buying trust. They're not just buying your product. And I think, you look at the security companies that are out there, the Sentinel Ones, the CrowdStrikes, the Palo Altos of the world. Yes, it's easy for them to tell the security story of here's the why it's important to us. But if you can't connect with your customers in that ecosystem of that product and that capability and offering, you're not actually going to be successful to keep growing and scaling with the business, because the customer wants to know, if I'm buying, XYZ, I'm in the long haul with you for XYZ and that center of the ecosystem. And the supply chain continues to be that thing that brings it all together, whether it's like we talked about in the beginning, whether it's a truck delivering a product, whether it's a warehouse management system that is, doing a handheld scanner and actually scanning what that product needs to be. All those things are attack points. And that's an ecosystem that we have to think about. And so when you put trust at the center of that eco point, you're going to actually see, like, wow, here's where I'm actually not only bringing that interconnected togetherness from a modern supply chain, it's here's where I'm making the differentiator of cyber trust has now become a paramount domain. And I think that's a disservice. I think, quite frankly, the industry is not doing well on is, why do we not have a cyber trust arm? You can be proactive in a lot of areas and you can actually get ahead of a lot of things. But if you're not actually truly dedicating a true, team and a domain to discipline this, like we do with cloud security or application security or product security, how are you going to actually grow with your customers?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm glad to hear that you've set up that trust organization. You need to have that level of trust. Just one more quick question about software bill of materials. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. I think it's great what you said about AI. I don't think we want to lose sight of the fact that we, still require software bill of materials for a lot of this stuff. And it's still a major topic. And I was just wondering how Blue Yonder is helping clients gain visibility into what's, actually under the hood, for your software and SBOM.
Yeah, I think the good thing is for us really, it's, we continue to say, here's how we're looking at not only, especially because we're an AI company, it's the models, the data sets, all those things. And then I think, to your point, the SBOMs is more around how do you think about the actual software components of things. And I think bridging those two together and saying, okay, here's how we, quite frankly, at least from the cyber lens, it's I want to be able to say, okay, great, you've got an ingredients list with your, with your SBOM. And it's like, here's how you're looking at the software or the libraries or the modules or whatever it is. And here's where I layer on the security pieces to it. It's like, great, here's where I'm scanning the code continuously, like we talked about, especially this NAs. Here's how I'm protecting the cloud workloads. And here's where I'm identifying what those hidden vulnerabilities are and still part of like nailing the basics. Here's how I layer in that cybersecurity SBOM with you. And then same thing on the AI footprint. It's, we don't train on customer models. It's more of we make sure that we're doing the right things around our AI bomb, in some capacity by saying we have the right, rapid incident response in place. We look at AI specific, threat mitigation. We do red teaming with, our vendors that we work with in that capacity. And I think the fact that we can actually say we're doing the right safeguards and putting those right safeguards in place to prevent, the data poisoning or being able to attack modern supply chains this day and age. We do that with, the vendors that we partner with in that capacity to make sure that you have both comfort in not only just the SBOM, but also what we're doing from an AI bomb perspective. And I think that's an area where I think as we continue to evolve as an industry or as an organization, I think you're going to see that shift of there's going to have to be some type of, I keep calling it the C bomb, which what is the cyber bill of materials? You can't keep having 50,000 vendors anymore. The third party risk, the fourth party risk, the fifth party risk keeps growing and getting bigger. And I think you're going to see companies trying to downsize more into my C bomb, my cyber bomb is really, these are my tools and tool sets. And here's my capabilities to defend against it. And here's how I'm continually bringing that together into, again, like you and I just talked about, that what is that ecosystem that's at the center of any supply chain company? And here's that cyber ecosystem that protects those supply chain companies.
Yeah, as things get more complex, I think that's probably the way that we're gonna have to go. And you've actually used AI in you mentioned your red teaming exercises and, using AI, to, help improve your own software development process and, looking for cyber vulnerabilities. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think this day and age, if you're not doing, quite frankly, if anybody's using AI and if you're not doing, if you're not leveraging AI for any type of not only just security best practices, but not doing any type of red teaming against, quite frankly, your models, like you're late to the game. And I think people, we get nervous when we talk about red teaming because you're basically looking for somebody to find that vulnerability, for you or be able to look at your attack techniques. And when you're telling your executive leadership team or your board of directors of I've done all the right stuff to make sure our attack surface or our posture management is protected. And if somebody can actually get in, through a red teaming event, you kind of are like, my God, I thought I fixed that. You kind of have that fear factor to the very beginning of, oh, I thought I fixed that. And so I think with, the way things are going with AI, and I think how you look at it is that is your opportunity to be actually proactive and say, I want to adversarially test my actual process and procedures. I want to use them to actually uncover these vulnerabilities or these risks or these failure modes, with artificial intelligence before an actual bad actor does. Again, remember, bad actors, they're crowdsourcing behind the scenes to be able to see how much they can get into. And I think with AI red teaming, I'm lucky I have an incredible partnership with HackerOne. And that's not, I mean, it's not to pick any one vendor versus the other. I'm lucky I have a really great partnership with them. And we do simulate those real world attacks. And we do talk about how do we look at prompt injections and jailbreaking and, hallucinations and all those things. And I think that's part of building your cyber trust ecosystem is you've got to find the right organization and company to really work with that you can also build trust with as you grow and evolve, especially with AI. And so I think when you do that, the red teaming becomes a very powerful tool and capability to help you create these methods or these processes to say, I want you to come find the areas where we can bypass things because again, it comes back to the governance. I want to be able to then go put those guardrails in place in those system prompts. And I think you have to be doing that. And it's, OWASP has a great Gen AI red teaming guide. MITRE has, an Atlas framework. Again, we have
Yes,
to talk
yeah,
about these things as an industry, not, oh my gosh, you're naming these certain things. And it's like, no, it's, I want us to talk about supply chain security, which means we have to talk about red teaming. We have to talk about third party dependencies and all those things. Cyber resiliency is another great area, but it's like, if you're not talking about all these things collectively as a supply chain community, we're never going to be successful together against the AI attacks that are now hitting companies.
that's right, and, I'm glad we're talking about that right now. So to kind of wrap things up, I just have one more question for you until we
Yes.
talk next time. If you could give some advice to any, CSO or, chief risk officer, who's trying to vet a sprawling network of digital vendors right now that are out there, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I would definitely say the advice is very I call it the pendulum swing. You've still got to nail the basics. You've got to look at your patch management. You've got to look at your network, architecture. You got to look at your infrastructure. You've got to be able to swing that pendulum swing. If you're still going to have this tech foundation that matters, or we like to call it probably in some capacity now, like your old school tech debt, you still have to protect that. At the same time, you've got to swing this pendulum to your company is moving 10,000 times faster with AI and wanting to adopt more AI capabilities. Anthropic is doing a ton of footprint in how they're, driving more of a governance footprint in the industry from using AI tools safely in a different manner. The industry is going just as fast, and I think you've got to be able to swing that pendulum swing. For one, you're protecting your company at the first and foremost forefront. At the same time, you're trying to help your business enable faster. Ask people if you need help. I think that's the thing that people don't realize. We get into these CISO roles. We spend, our first 90 days, as everybody likes to say, drinking from a higher fire hose. CISOs
Mhm.
don't drink from a fire hose anymore. It's more of we get in and with 30 days, we've got to have a quick win. We've got to establish a presence. We've got to establish a security culture. We have all these things. And I think there's an element where we still have to say to each other, wow, I'm stepping into this really big role, whether it's, a 500 employee company or a 500,000 employee company. You're still stepping into a role where you need to understand your tech landscape. You still need to understand your attack landscape. And then being able to say, okay, here's my good, better, best. Here's the things in the most critical bucket that are low hanging fruit I can actually fix really fast, or maybe put a plan in place to fix it. But that strategic investment of where you need to go next, ask other CISOs, what are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? Supply chain is great for me because one, not only am I passionate about it and passionate about security, I talk to so many different CISOs across the supply chain, and I could go talk to, somebody that runs 400 or 700 warehouses. They're not concerned necessarily so much about an AI model as they are about OT security, the handheld device that could be used to scan and be an attack entrance,
Right, right.
against them, versus I could be talking to, a global trucking company that basically is more worried about the fraud of the driver. I mean, the pendulum swing of security is so different. And I think being able to talk to other CISOs and say, what keeps you up at night is very different to every single CISO. And I think you've got to be able to bridge that community in the supply chain. And it's something I continually do and invest with our cyber trust arm. And so that's what I would say. Your best advice, start talking to each other, start breaking down the silos within the security community and see what are the things that keep you up at night if you own 700 warehouses or if you own 700,000 trucks. Your differences of security are always going to be different, but you've got to be able to talk about the good, the better, and the best and all those things and figure out how you can attack it together.
Yeah,
Communication is key.
great response. We do need to talk to each other. Even though our concerns might vary, depending on the subsegments of this business that we're in. I've always found out that the real innovation and progress happens when you start that cross communication between different
Yes.
businesses, different silos. That's kind of where innovation happens, is at those, crossover points to me. So a great discussion today with Erika Voss, the CSO of Blue Yonder, who I think is actually one of the leading voices in cybersecurity for supply chain today. And hopefully this will be one of many podcasts that we do with Blue Yonder on cybersecurity, a very wide-ranging discussion today. We started off our discussion talking about, what are the overall issues of cybersecurity and cyber resilience in supply chain, the impact of digital transformation, the impact of industrial AI, the impact of trust, why that's important, red teaming exercises, using AI in your software development process, a really wide ranging discussion, very interesting. Thanks very much for your time today, Erika, and we look forward to having you back really soon.
Me too, Larry. Thank you again so much for the time. I love the conversation. And yes, much like you and I envision what we want to do, let's continue to secure the chain.
Let's keep securing the chain, and we'll see you at the next edition of the ARC Logistics Viewpoints podcast.